right, Quentin. Here we go. Episode 4
All right, let's do
on
it.
our system training progress podcast. So I wanted to start with a video today of something I saw. Um, it's a video of Islam doing gymnastics. Can you see my screen here?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right. Just watch this clip. This is Islam training, and this is current. This is happening now.
Oh,
He got a gymnastics coach. He's going for the full backflip.
come on, Islam, stick that shit. There you
Oh,
go.
this is pretty good. But yeah, I just thought that was cool. I wanted to oh, he's doing some acrobatic stuff. I was curious what your thoughts are on this. If you're a fighter, is gymnastics training something that would be productive to cross train from a nervous system advantages perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I think gymnastics training, one, it's like very neuromuscular demanding, and it requires a huge amount of control and better understanding of your body. I mean, you can obviously Islam like is being taught how to like brace and rotate himself in different forms of velocity. You know, if you actually look at a lot of Eastern European wrestlers, in like Ukraine, Chechnya, Dagestan, Russia, they do a lot of acrobatics in their wrestling. That's kind of like a wrestling subculture. It's working on backflips and stuff like that. Have you ever seen that in wrestling rooms where guys will,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it's a very explosive movement, requires a ton of strength, and it's good for developing coordination. I'd say the only thing that I would caution fighters on is don't hurt yourself. It could be, and know how to program it, because it's a very very taxing thing to try to do a backflip. Obviously, like Islam, GSP, other guys like do it as like cross training. It's fun, it's different, it gets them re-engaged into something, which I think has a ton of benefit. But it is a ton of explosive energy and impact, on like triple extension on like the foot, ankles, knees, and hips. So you gotta do it wisely. He's obviously working with a professional, so I think the way he's doing it, I think that's only going to help him.
yeah. It's. I was curious too. What your thoughts on Islam specifically, his style? It's. I mean, he's kind of he's one of the best, if not the best in the world right now, and he's good at everything. But he's not like the most athletic guy. He's super strong. But I was wondering if you think that this might fill in some of his gaps in his style specifically.
It could definitely help. It could definitely help improve some of his explosiveness, keep him engaged into training. Giving him something new to develop within himself, making it fun again. Because when you reach like world title status, you've been in the game for so long. You're not learning a ton of new things. You're just refining and perfecting what already got you there. And George did the same thing. He started doing gymnastics because he was looking for more ways to push himself, more ways to engage his brain. That also worked as a decent cross trainer, to kind of help his sports performance. So with Islam's fighting style, if you look at, I like to compare Islam with Khabib because they're basically two different body types that went on the same exact training path. Like even down to the diet. They ate together, they slept together, they trained together, they lived together, right? And if you look at someone like Khabib is like he's like a crab. He's like a sea clamp. He is really good. Like he's very developed into the core. He's got really strong feet, but he doesn't have very strong, I wouldn't say they're not strong, but they're not a great strength ratio like in his pelvis. His glutes probably don't have a ton of strength. He kind of waddles when he walks, when you watch Khabib walk, just like his dad, which kind of shows that he really puts a lot of pressure on the outsides of his feet. IT bands are probably really overactive. Glute medius muscles really overactive. And Khabib doesn't rotate well. Like his thoracic twist is not very great. And a lot of that could be genetic. Something like that he got from his father. But what Khabib can do, he can squeeze and like clamp down and press down like this and smash you and just like lock you into place and just hit you with damage. right? Someone like Islam has a better genetic base for overall movements, or let me say for overall biomechanics. He rotates pretty well. His coordination is pretty good. His striking is pretty good. His wrestling is phenomenal. But one of the major differences, Khabib had really strong feet, and if you look at the way Khabib fought, he can really bounce in and out of activity. He can stay on his toes. He can enter. He can move away. Now, does he have the skill work to always utilize that ability? Probably not. Boxing's not his first thing. Khabib doesn't really throw kicks. He uses boxing to close distance for wrestling to like smash you down. But Islam has very weak feet. Islam has very flat feet. You can tell the foot arches are very weak. So Islam, his style is more about timing and absorbing counters. He's really good at that. He's really good at knowing how to absorb something like that's why I forgot what this choke is. I think it's a Darce choke where he gets guys in like this. He got Poirier in that. Guys who get good at Darce chokes are usually a little half second behind when it comes to speed. So they get really good at developing traps to compensate for that lack of explosiveness or that lack of recoil that a lot of fighters will really rely on through the feet. So his style is really good for absorbing impact, for absorbing punches and he's all about timing. If you watch Islam train, you'll kind of see, there's a lot of memes where you'll see Islam, staring off into space while, Khabib is trying to teach something, A lot of that could be that Islam is more of a kinesthetic learner, where he has to learn something, go through it, feel it, and then probably because he's always a little slower on the snap. Maybe sometimes he's a little bit more behind on some things that he has to go through all the different types of scenarios. I need to put my foot exactly here if he does this. I need to move my body this way. He has to really digest and expand upon the technique, maybe as a way for him to compensate for having just a little less explosiveness, say compared to other fighters.
Yeah.
And that's why if you look at Khabib, most of his striking, very well timed, has a lot of power. He's very patient when he fights. Khabib's a little less patient. Khabib will kind of if he's pissed, he'll get in there, he'll take a shot and try to get him back. Khabib's been known to put himself in a little bit of danger. Islam is a little smarter about it. He's a little bit more tactical, a little bit more planned out. And I think that gives him a huge advantage. Sorry, I hope my dogs aren't barking too loud.
That's good. So the way you're kind of breaking down Khabib's posture, right? You can see the way he walks. You're talking about how he waddles. I'm curious just for kind of flipping that same sort of analysis just onto the everyday humans. There's a lot of people who have lower back issues or kind of rounding of the shoulders. There's some common misalignments just from sitting, working at a desk, using your phone, that kind of stuff. So I'm curious, what are some of the most common misalignments that you've seen? What does it look like? And then how do you train that using your nervous system, but also just from kind of the PT side of nervous system training? How do you address those common misalignments?
Okay. So there's usually a couple variations that you come across more often. A lot of lower abdominal weakness, in people, a lot of, misfiring of the glutes, weakness in the feet, overdevelopment of hamstrings, and weakness in the lower abdominal wall, from the belly button down, especially in kids. I train a lot of different kids, they usually score pretty poor in those areas. Second most common thing is usually tightness and inactivity in the upper thoracic around the scapulas, and a lot to figure out for sure, because you'll have some people who maybe don't pass the visual test. Maybe you look at their shoulders, they're very rounded, their posture isn't great. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that the biomechanical range of motion is efficient. We don't always utilize what we can see. You got to see what the range of motion are. So we have ways to kind of test, shoulder extension, shoulder flexion, or maybe it's the other way around. But see how far their range is up. We'll have them lay on the ground with a pole, right? And to raise their shoulders up as high as they can while they're laying face down. We measure how many inches they can raise the bar and how even each side can raise it. Because one side is raised higher than the other. And then we'll do the same thing in reverse, from the lower back measuring upwards. And if they're within optimal ranges, then and they're not dealing with chronic pain, then I would say there's not too much of a problem. And then you'll see that some kids who I was like, oh man, this kid probably doesn't have great range. His shoulder's really rounded, but he did having really good ranges and never had a problem with the sewing arm.
Interesting.
So you can kind of look at some of these things and take it at face value, but you never really know till you test it. And so let's say they don't pass the visual test, right? And then they don't pass the evaluation test. It's not looking good. A lot of the times we're just going to focus on the same correlating muscle groups that usually cause those type of dysfunctions. Like the upper thoracic is a big one right now. It's usually overdevelopment of the pectorals. Anterior muscles are too overdeveloped. Posterior muscles are not developed enough. Tightness in the lats, dysfunction in the serratus, because your serratus helps you raise your arm up. If your serratus is stuck like this, you see a lot of guys are like, and they can't push forward. Like the serratus helps you raise your arms above your head better, gives you a better range of motion, and how the scapula slides over that serratus muscle. So we want to loosen up the pectorals, get that tissue, manual stretching, is definitely something that's going to be useful. Even some forms of static stretching on certain muscle groups to try to get the cellular tissue to start expanding, start lengthening, so they can access those range of motions. Building up the scapulas, can they protract and retract properly? Does one scapula get stuck? Are there upper traps tight? Are the upper traps not very well developed? And then you just start prescribing exercises to make the biomechanics more efficient. I'll do more of a physical therapy route in the beginning, 2-pound dumbbells, laying on their back, trying to get the serratus firing, putting their back against the wall like this, sliding up and down the wall. These angel sort of things will work that. Pushing the serratus forward, elbows against the wall, sliding all the way up. Just different modalities that are pretty basic stuff that you probably see when you're a pitcher that usually help with scapula control. And we'll work them into that, until those become easy. And then we'll start, we'll probably mix in ball work training, alongside that. So let's say if someone has the shoulder issues, we test it. Okay, once we have the test, kind of give it more of a visual look. I'll push the tissue around, hey, does this hurt here? Does this hurt here? If it hurts, it's tight. If it tickles, it's weak. So that gives me more clues of where we need to make improvements. And then we'll do something we'll start working on the scapular routines, building up shoulder abductions, stretching out door frame stretches, doing things on the wall. And then we'll mix in posterior ball work, shoulder extensions, shoulder flexions, things along those lines, and work those in, give it enough time, retest it every 3 weeks. If the bar is going up higher on both sides, we're reaching optimal ranges, we're on the way to fixing it.
I haven't heard that before. If it tickles, it's weak. If it hurts, it's tight. Can you just real quick explain that? I haven't heard that.
Yeah. So that's what I learned when I first got a massage gun. I got one from the Sharper Image, and I got it 2019. I got it, and it was a really interesting tool. And when I was using it on myself, there were certain areas that always kind of bothered me, that I always had issues with, lingering injuries, mechanical dysfunctions, and certain areas, especially this right pectoral minor, has always kind of given me issues. It's always felt swollen. Sometimes it'll hurt. And when I hit it with a massage gun, it was pretty painful, and then I was like, oh God, and when I started, I was like, okay. So I would when I did my door frame stretches, it felt tighter on this side. When I did on this side, it tickled more because this side's a little weaker. And so that's when I was starting to get an idea, okay, there's something there. Well, what else? What else do I know is tight? It's well, I know that my right trap is always tight. Hit it with a massage gun, it felt pretty painful. Hit the left one, it felt a little painful, but also kind of tickled a little bit. I was okay, that's interesting. My left hamstring, I know my left hamstring is weaker because it always scores lower on the assessment. Hit it with the massage gun, this shit was really ticklish. Hit my right hamstring, that's always stronger, it was painful. So that's when I started to like analyze, like, okay, what is this feedback my nervous system is giving? Like, what does this mean? It's like, well, ticklish must be weak, tightness must be painful, or inflamed. Sometimes you can get both. It'll feel painful and ticklish at the same time. Sometimes things can be tight and weak, you know? So I started working this with more athletes. More athletes I would talk about their issues, and I had like I had a chart in my office that had all like the trigger point patterns. So they would say, oh, I got an issue here. And this chart said like, hey, the following issues here could also be like subscapular issues, lavatory. Like you can have a problem in like your lower back that could be related to a trigger point in your calf. It said
Yeah.
reference these two, and work them to see if it helps. And I had this athlete that like had like this lower back pain that was just bothering her. She's a track athlete and it was just agitating her all day. And she's like when she came in, she's like, I like something's going on with my lower back. I'm like, okay, well, let me just pull up the chart. Let's see what it is. Is it the erector spinae? Is it the QL? Is it these following things? So we're working those areas in the lower back and nothing was working. And then I looked at the chart. It said reference like lower half gastric nemus. And so like it labeled it like R2. And so I went over R2. There was these areas on the outside of the calf, like right where there's like this little tibial bone that floats in between your shin. Started working out in the shot. That hurt like hell for her. Super painful. I did it to the other side, nothing. I was like, okay, let's, I worked it with the massage gun for like 5-10 minutes. Worked it, let her get through it. The muscle was like twitching, and then after we were done, she walked around, back pain was gone.
Wow.
It never came back. Because there was like it's either fascial or muscle or something was like bound up. Something was not like efficiently gliding to assist her locomotion and is traveling all the way up her leg into the opposite side of her lower back. Maybe it's too tight, maybe it's overactive, I'm not exactly sure, but that's when I started to notice, okay, like there's something here. Like depending on how it feels for them determines what's the current health of the muscle.
With that trigger point chart that you used, what school of thought does that come from? Is that like a chiropractor chart or acupuncture? Is it an
No,
Eastern
it's
medicine
all like
chart?
it's all like Western medicine, physical therapy stuff.
Okay.
It's like I got it on like Amazon for like $10. This
Okay.
is
Cool.
yeah, just like if you go on Google and you put in like shoulder pain pattern or shoulder trigger points, they'll show like a diagram with a bunch of little X's.
Yeah.
And people are trying to like lacrosse ball and all that sort of thing, which I personally think like massage, like foam rollers and lacrosse balls are okay. I don't think they're super effective. Excuse me, because they just apply pressure, which can help with releases and it can help creating some length, but it can be very slow process. With a massage gun, you get that same sort of feedback where you can hit the Golgi tendon, like release the muscle so you don't have as many compensators around it. And then you can get it like a little bit more elastic and you have vibration. Like vibration is like that's basically like a speed up process for cellular movement. And so the more it vibrates, the more like the fluid and the cells can pass through each other like muscles and tendon layers. And it's also massage guns can also work for tendonitis. Like I had bicep tendonitis, I'd hit it with the massage gun, it would kind of agitate it, but I'd just work it because like there's practices like physical therapists will say like, oh, like massage it, like rub that area, it'll encourage blood flow. I'm like, okay, well, like this massage gun is same type of contact, let's test it. Then the next day it actually hurt more, but the pain wasn't radiating, it was very localized. Then I did it again the next day, put some ice on it, little physical therapy movements. Then the pain got smaller and smaller until eventually it just started to dissipate. So massage gun is a nice, easy way to kind of encourage more blood flow and start to therapy and stimulate like maybe tendonitis or inflamed muscle groups.
Yeah, for sure. I've got one. I love it. And it was cheap. I got mine for $30 on Amazon. It was some
Yeah.
off brand. All right. So I know I'm a trainer. I know that what I tell my clients is typically a muscle training program will take about 3 months to take effect. You get on a program, you stick with it after 3 months, the results will be obvious. You'll see them in the mirror. You'll see them on the weights on your barbell, whatever you're doing. Um, how long does nervous system training take to come into effect? When do you start to see the differences? When do you start to feel the differences? How immediate is it?
So a lot of guys will start to feel a difference within the first 72 hours because because those are neurological effects, and that comes in the way of like how you move, feeling lighter on your feet, feeling less restricted, a lot tighter. Like the neurological adaptations are the first to show up. So within the first like 2 to 3 days, you'll start to feel a difference in your body, especially when you start moving, in your sport. Most significant show ups usually, for some reason, the human body makes big breakthroughs like in threes. Like first 3 days, then first 3 weeks, they'll start to feel a difference, start to feel a noticeable difference, like where it's like, okay, like I can kick easier, I can move better, my reaction time is better. And then like 6 weeks, most people start saying things like, hey, you're moving better, you're making good improvements, like you can start getting third party affirmation. And then when you get into 12 weeks, that's when you start noticing like huge performance increases, where now you're like a different fighter, you're like a totally different athlete. You have like, everything's coming easier, you can learn things faster, you can progress, you can start improvising your new neuromuscular efficiencies into techniques. So it happens. The improvements show up way faster than any other training system that I've done in the past, and that's what hooked me on first. Because here's a big ugly secret that no one really likes to see and trainers don't really like to talk about. It's that there's all these different systems. You got like Olympic weightlifting systems, you got like, functional systems, you got kettlebell stuff with on it, you got WEC method, you have all these different things. They all work. All of them. They all work. And people always come to me like, oh, there's so much information. Like, how do I know what's right or wrong? I was like, it's all right. But you have to look at it more. You can't just look at it as a surface thing. You have to look at it as a systematic thing. Will this system get me the highest return on investment in the shortest amount of time? Does this have enough leverage to invest my time and energy into? Like, will I yield a result in 3 weeks, or will it take 3 months? That's how you determine how you approach your training. And we're so used to like right or wrong, black or right, true or false. But nothing is action. Like, that's just a bilateral way of our brains to understand information because we have two hemispheres. Everything in the world, even the construction of your desk, is insanely complex, down to the engineering, the screws, the math, the materials, what it takes to even build, like composite the wood. Everything is super complex. There is no just right or wrong. So people need to really look at this in a more critical thinking lens, in a more systematic thinking lens. Will this deliver the results I need in time? Will this yield good leverage on performance in a short amount of time? Will this also help my longevity in a long period of time? Or will some of these training ideas be too hard on my body that's not sustainable? Like a perfect example, who's that Dagestani guy that's like super flexible and super mobile and he threw his back out? He's like one of Khabib's boys. He does these videos where he's doing these huge like rotations with his back. He's like doing all these weird, like, he's just so hyper mobile and he prides himself on it. And everyone looks at it like, oh wow, mobility is good. Look how mobile he is. Like, okay, yeah, but there's also sustainable mobility. The level of mobility he was trying to push in his body and also what he had genetically was not sustainable. It eventually started to destabilize his spine because he was doing it too much.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's how you got to look at these things, and it's hard. It's hard to identify all these variables.
Mm-hmm. All right, I wanted to shift a little bit to the older folks. Like, we've talked about how in previous episodes we've talked about how nervous system training promotes longevity, but I want to talk about it. I wanted to ask if you've worked with older clients, people who are like their goals are more injury prevention. They don't want to reduce the risk of breaking a hip, falling, stuff like that. just is there good programs to use nervous system training to improve core abilities like balance for everyday activities? And then are there any, the side question is, are there any benefits neurologically to reduce Alzheimer's, reduce the risk of cognitive decline from nervous system training? Is that anything you've come across?
Yeah, so as far as applying nervous system training modalities to like older people and the benefits they get, it's pretty significant. I had an adult fitness class that I did every like Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and all of my clients, there was like 4 or 5 of them, in this group. All of them were over the age of 48, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And all of them experienced like improvements, because the biggest danger to people as you get older is falling. Because falling, if you don't have good proprioception, you can't catch yourself. Combine that with like degeneration of the nervous system and, calcium deposits, the bones become more brittle, the muscle tissue starts to decrease in size, which also acts as a bit of an airbag for your skeletal system. The impact is too great, and it could break the pelvis, and that is probably the number one cause of mortality in older people. Because then they got to get hospitalized, and they can get sick. Their immune system's compromised and it's very traumatic. They don't move well. It compromises their leg strength. They get sedentary in bed trying to recover, and maybe it doesn't fully heal all the way because they're so old. So that's really like, a lot of times that's like the final straw to break the camel's back, for lack of a better analogy. Even doing like the ball work, having them develop better proprioceptive responses, it also encourages the nervous system to start regenerating instead of degenerating. And as far as it helping with things like MS, Parkinson's, like neurological diseases, I don't know, because I don't have data on this, but I could logically say yes, just following a logical path of, if doing this training shows neurological rejuvenation, and we've been able to measure the nervous system rejuvenating and redeveloping the cellular function from proprioception, from reactive exercises, from certain forms of strength training, right? So if we logically already know that, even though they're not tested under these exact modalities, but we know the scientific principle is true, I could only logically assume that doing this type of training will stimulate the nervous system to start to heal and rejuvenate, or at least improve what they got, because maybe it won't cure it, but it could help optimize where they're at and slow down decline.
Yeah, that makes sense. It made sense. I was thinking along similar lines, so it makes sense. It just logically, it seems like you're firing your nervous system more. It would regenerate or degenerate slower, at least, potentially even regenerate. All right, something we haven't talked about. From training, a lot of people care about aesthetics. We've talked about the performance, but I'm curious, how does nervous system training, what are the effects on aesthetics? Do you notice more muscle tone? Does it help lose weight if that's one of your goals? What are the impacts on the aesthetics from being in a consistent nervous system training program?
Like visual aesthetics?
Yeah, just.
I don't know. Like, I would say, like, look at someone like BJ Penn, before the nervous system training and after. He looked a lot better. Looked like he had better muscle balance, better muscle composition. You look at someone like Rafael dos Anjos. You look at his physique look before the nervous system training, look after. Like, he looked way more developed. Better muscle tone, better muscle density. I would say that's one thing that you'll notice more. Your muscles, sometimes your muscles will grow larger. If like your nervous system can detect the amount of stress you're getting, and it's, it will adapt in a way of, it needs the muscle cells, the sarcomere, to be a little wider to help, with the amount of stress you're putting on. But the good thing is your body, like, doing the nervous system training in this way, focusing more on isometrics, plyometrics, neurological training, you'll develop a better muscle balance, and less compensators. So a lot of the times, You'll put on the amount of muscle that's optimal for your frame and optimal to the stressors of your sport. So if you're like, say, an American football player and you're doing the nervous system training, right? And you go out and play football, if the demands of football that's being put on your body, like playing games, your body will determine, okay, we need more muscle mass. We'll try to create as much as we can, maintaining like the strength. Like the sport will stimulate you to adapt. So like, or in MMA, if you constantly only eat X amount of calories to make a weight, you're moving well at a certain speed, a certain strength to size ratio. Your body will try to optimize that to match the intensity of what you're putting it through. Now, that's also to say, like, if you're an American football player and you do need more muscle mass, you probably will have to do some hypertrophy. Because but that's also a very unique sport where there's an intense amount of collision, especially armored collision, because you'll get helmets, hitting your body. So having a certain amount of muscle mass will help protect you and is probably appropriate for that sport. But let's say if you're like an MMA fighter, you need way more velocity. You need to stay fast for like 3 to 5 minutes, and you're only allowed 60 seconds to recover. So you need a certain amount of muscle tissue to support the goal of the sport. But a lot of times, guys develop harder muscles. Like the muscle tissue looks a lot harder because it's more denser. There's more fibers that you recruit into it. A better balance between like anterior and posterior shoulders. It's called muscular equilibrium. Training in plyometric fashion, the eccentric force usually is 40% greater than the concentric force. That usually triggers, like at velocity, that triggers the stretch shortening cycle to activate into the muscle. And so your agonist to antagonist muscle groups will be more balanced. You'll be more equalized, and you'll have better symmetry, better composition, less compensation, better muscle tonality.
I like it. Yeah, I heard a fact. I was mentioning earlier that I've been taught in my education as a trainer that it takes about 90 days, 3 months, for muscular changes to take effect. But as soon as you start on a program and you're consistent with it, it takes about 2 weeks for you to see the first effects. And that's really just a neurological change. That's at least my understanding of it, is that after 2 weeks, your nerves are more active in the areas you've been training. And though the muscle mass hasn't really changed, if you get on the scale, if you get on one of those higher end scales that measure the muscle mass, visually it's starting to makes a difference around then. So I was curious on the aesthetics, and earlier I asked about the time till the changes take effect of nervous system training.
And you also gotta think about something. A lot of times when people think of these questions, or when industries are compiling like this data and this like rule of thumb sort of logic, you also got to remember, what type of lens are they looking at things through. Significant muscle growth or muscle change will happen within like the first like 3 to 6 weeks. That's when you'll start to notice difference. Okay, but what lens are they looking through? Are they looking through a lens of hypertrophy? Are they looking through a lens of, you know what I mean? So yeah, with what they're trying to do, that is. But the problem is, we don't have the ability to quantify neurological improvements yet. We don't have the technology. So that's why you'll see a lot of guys improve, but maybe aesthetically look the same. The key to looking aesthetic is diet. That's really the secret. If you want to look ripped, you want to look like all your muscles to pop, you got to lower your body fat.
All right. Yeah. So the question is, what is a good nutrition suggestion for someone who's prioritizing nervous system training? And let's go with 2 avatars. So one avatar is an athlete, someone in their prime, someone who's going for their best possible, highest achieving self, professional athlete or something like that. What would you suggest? Are there certain foods that they can eat that would target neural development the same way a high protein diet would target muscular development? And then avatar 2 is middle-aged person, someone who's maybe developed a bit of a belly. They have been an athlete in the past, but they want to get back to where they're used to be. Um, what would you suggest from a nutritional perspective, and also supplements? Are there any supplements you would suggest for these people?
Okay. So like for the fighter, first before I make any changes to nutrition, I gotta know a couple things. One, when is their next fight, and what weight class do they need to fight in? Then I can kind of determine what their caloric intake should be to make the certain amount of weight at that time, and also where their macronutrients need to be. That's what's most important, is hitting your macronutrients. I don't think there's any sort of like secret with food. I think a lot of that is just more marketing for people to sell diets. Like the biggest distinctions when it comes, let me just say this. The human body can adapt to a huge variety of different diets. Like we can go keto, we can eat all vegetables, we can eat all meat, we can live off carbohydrates, right? The body is very adaptable, and that's part of the reason why we're able to populate to the size that we have compared to other species, because we can survive on all sorts of different things. Like there's some phenomenal athletes that have come out of Africa, to get into like professional sports, and they grew up on like cow fat, rice, and beans like most of their life, right? No creatine, like no no monohydrate protein or anything like that, so I don't think it's a huge factor of what type of diet you have, unless your goal requires a certain amount of output. So like say for this fighter, I don't think vegan is very well sustainable for fighting, just because it requires a ton of explosive energy, a huge amount of ATP, and that ATP also helps you with training capacity and the demand of the sport and reduce injury. And I don't think veganism, or vegetarian has enough of the proper macronutrients to help sustain that kind of sport. Some people have done it, but I don't know. I haven't seen great results out of their performance by doing it. So I'm going to want to make sure that they're eating the proper amount of carbohydrates that they need, given the amount of activity, how many calories that they burnt, per day. And also make sure that they're eating their carbohydrates at the right time, so their carbohydrates is being utilized properly for blood sugar and energy expenditure. Because carbohydrates, it's a mixed bag. They're highly inflammatory, but they're also highly combustible. It makes for really good explosive fuel. So we're probably going to make that trade. Okay, you're going to deal with a little bit more inflammation. It's not great for your teeth. Like carbohydrates is terrible for your teeth. But we got a fight coming up. We're already in an unhealthy area because we're in the UFC. We're already on a non-longevity path. Let's be honest. So we're gonna make sure that they have plenty of carbs. I'll teach them to supplement sugar before their training session. They're feeling a little flat. Tell them bring candy with you. Like, bring Skittles or something like that. Get instant sugar in your blood so you have it to use, so your muscles don't shear down as hard. And also so your nervous system has plenty of chemical fuel, so it can take in the training stimulus and embed in it. Because if you're really flat, you're not timing your diet right, you're very low on energy, you can train and your nervous system will actually decline. It will reject the stimulation to try to self-preserve. And so now your teeth, yeah. What were you saying?
Carbohydrates the fuel for the nervous system? Is that what you're saying?
It's one of them.
Yeah,
like protein. Yeah, proteins is essential for the nervous system. Carbohydrates are essential. Fats are essential. Now, your nervous system your body can find ways around that. Like if you rob it from carbs, it will just start converting fat as your fuel source. But fat and ketones aren't as combustible, as carbohydrates. So your ATP and your explosive energy is going to start to decline, but your aerobic energy is going to go through the roof because ketones and oxygen bond together really well, I think. I'm not a nutritionist, dietetic. Like, this is just stuff I've learned secondhand. So anyone watching, please correct me. This is not my first expertise. But a lot of guys that I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, I eat plenty of protein. I'm good. It's like, no, dude, no. Like, you need protein, yes. You need more carbohydrates than protein for MMA. If you were just in fitness and you're trying to build muscle, protein is essential. Absolutely. But in a high velocity, high impact sport where explosive energy is your primary resource, you need carbohydrates to manage that resource. You know, and you need them at the right times. You need sugars, you need things that you need good fuel, right? You need nitrous oxide for the car. Now, if like, let's say, okay, so let's go a little further into that. So let's say they're competing in 6 weeks and they got to lose 20 pounds, then we got to go in caloric deficit. You got to start working out with a heart rate monitor. How many calories are you burning per day? We got to track it. Got to get them on some sort of food app, like MyFitnessPal or something. You know, start weighing out their food, or teach them how to eat it properly, making sure that they're losing as much body fat as possible while sustaining their strength and their muscle tissue, you know, and they have the fuel for their workouts. A lot of guys miss weight because they eat too much damn protein. You know, they think that they're like, oh, 1 gram of protein for 1 pound of body weight. Like, not necessarily. We're not bodybuilding. We're not muscle building. You know, we're trying to generate force. You know, force requires many, many reps of the same thing over and over again. Just like in baseball, you hit that ball off the tee hundreds of thousands of times as fast as you can. You need carbs, right? We're not breaking down tissue. It's not to say tissue doesn't break down. It does shear, you know, and protein does help repair it, but that's not the main that's not the main goal of what we're trying to do with the tissue. We're trying to get the tissue to fire off more electricity and absorb energy better. Now, say for a normal guy, he's a jiu-jitsu hobbyist, does real estate, he's kind of fat, he's in his 50s or 40s or something.
Yeah, just certified middle age.
We'll probably do the same type of diet application, but maybe we'll lean it differently. You know, he'll have a more calorie deficit because we're trying to lose more body fat. He'll probably do a little bit more aerobic training to try to get him to burn 500 calories a day. You know, that puts him in a calorie deficit. If he does 500 calories per day, he hits his macronutrients right. He hits his caloric goal per day to equal X amount of weight loss in X amount of time. You know, if he does that all right, by the end of the week, he's going to lose 3,500 calories. He's going to lose 1 pound of body fat. No problem. You just got to stay consistent. And this is where everyone fucks it up. Everyone does this thing where like they do good like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday comes and they burn like 250 calories. And they eat around 2,200 calories, right? So they're only at a 50 caloric burn that day. Then the next day they totally fall off. They have a couple beers. It's their kid's birthday. They eat a little cake. Now they're up like 4,000 calories. Well, you just fucked up 4 days of caloric burn. If you're supposed to be burning 500 calories per day, you had 2,000 calories on Sunday. You know, that's like 4 or 5 days you just wasted. Now your weight's the same. It's just math. You know, if you stick to the math, you'll lose weight, and that's where everyone fucks it up. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry if I'm coming off a little more ranty than usual. This stuff just drives me crazy. I hear this all the time, like, oh yeah, my diet's good. I eat clean. Like, okay, you're 250 pounds and you say you eat clean. Eating clean's not a thing. That's not a real thing. That's a marketing term. There's no such thing as eating clean. You know, you like all you're doing is you're taking in resources, and there's pros and cons to those resources. Now, the whole idea behind eating clean is just sticking to foods that are lower on the glycemic index. Because foods that are higher on the glycemic index tend to create more systemic inflammation into the body. Inflammation creates an acidic environment. Acidic environments can break down DNA code in the mitochondria, can damage the cells, promotes disease and dysfunction over time. That's it. That's all you got to think about. This whole eating clean shit makes no sense. Now, you can maybe get into more like semantics where like there's like preservatives in certain foods that aren't great for your body. Okay, yeah. Like I get that, you know, like McDonald's food doesn't, you know, decompose, which is strange, you know, very strange. So I'm sure a lot of those things aren't great for your body, but it's probably because it raises your inflammation, you know, and it turns most of the resource that you eat, it converts that glucose into glycogen, turns it into body fat. Too much body fat, you start getting hypotension. Circulatory system and respiratory system starts getting taxed, and it starts getting damaged over time. Can promote heart disease, you know, and other issues. So that's how you have to look at it. You got to look at it, you know, like there's pros and cons. Because I worked with some athletes that eat like shit. Phenomenal athletes, explosive, fast, low body fat. They have the genetics to support it, but they get a little bit more sore here and there. Joints kind of bother them a little bit more. Like, yeah, the inflammation's probably really high here. That's one of your cons to your diet.
Yeah, there's one guy I worked with for a little while, and he would just eat like a gallon of ice cream, the $2 gallon of ice cream, just straight.
$2
But
gallon. That's who's selling
yeah,
ice cream for a gallon for $2. That's what
I
creepy
mean,
ice cream.
he was living in his car, taking every fight he could. He was just he was going after it. But yeah, he was he was getting. But yeah, he kind of worked at a barber shop, and they had a freezer there, and he put in there. But he was ripped. That was just all he was eating, He
Yeah.
was- but yeah, he would always have little tweaks and stuff. But yeah, there's one thing you mentioned earlier I wanted to dive into. You're talking about, you said, you made a comment or something like there's no way to measure neural output, and I'm curious about that. I'm curious and then when you say that, I think you mean there's no way to practically measure it. Like I'm sure that there's some
Right.
like there's like fMRI machines, like that measure it in the brain, but there's no way just for the average Joe to measure it the same way they can do strength, which is just you throw on as much weight as you can, see what you can lift. I'm curious, what are the best ways to measure it? That are possible at all. Like, are there any thermal camera machines that can do it, or something like that? And then B, like just practical. Like, can you test grip strength? Is that like a correlate that you can kind of go off of, even though it's not a direct measurement?
Yeah, there are some like tools that have monitors built into them to create a unit of measurement. Like now, because back when Marv was coming up with this system, like things like force plates and cell loading wasn't very available back in like 2004. That technology has really improved, like between like 2016 and now. That's when that technology started being more accessible. So there are practical ways to do this. So let me clarify something. When it comes to measuring performance increases of your nervous system, there are some practical things that we can measure. Like we can obviously measure vertical jump, broad jump, force generation into the ground with loading cells and things like that. How hard you punch, how hard you kick. You see that thing Joe Rogan's always kicking, that big like block of the target. So there are some tools out there that are rather newer technology to create quantifiable measurements. But one, those are really expensive. And two, not everyone knows exactly what they're looking at with the data, like your everyday person. There are other things that recently came up that have been helping, like Linus from Methods of Training in Germany, who is a nervous system trainer, does the same Maranovich training system. He has actually combined tools where there's like this thing, it's like a device that has like a pull cord on it, right? And a lot of people will put it on their like their barbells or whatever, and they'll like measure like how fast like they can lift it or something, or the speed of the crank, right? And it'll create like a certain amount of voltage and turn that into like a unit of measurement. Well, he's rigged that to a supercat. And so every time he does throws, it's cranking, and it's a cool setup. He's got it rigged to an iPad, and he's seeing how many what's the force production per throw. So that's one way you can measure it. Yeah. More practical ways, of course, like your vertical jump, your broad jump test, a speed and agility test, something simple like you can take 2 boxes at 6 inches, have them right outside of the athlete's feet, and they got to jump up, put both feet on the box, jump back, and hit the ground. And they have 10 seconds to get as many contacts as possible. That's one way you can test how quickly their foot speed is, how quickly the nervous system is firing with their feet. Now, what you can't always test is optimal biomechanics, ranges of motion, elasticity of the fascia, certain nuances like that when it comes to structural integrity, proper biomechanics, if there's energy leakage, a lot of that we have to do with our eyeball. We have to watch things in slow motion and break it down and determine based on a large sample size of previous athletes. Like for the pitch, when I watch my pitch in slow motion, their elbows lower, shoulder blades not kicking it up high enough, not enough strength in the scapula up here to help raise it up in the shoulder. The pectoral might be too tight, so when they throw when you do this, the kinetic leverage is going to hit here because this tissue isn't absorbing a lot of it. Elbow goes higher, all of a sudden the pectoral minor kicks in, and a lot of the kinetic energy can hit right here, less into the elbow, protecting their UCL. And we determine that just from like watching hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of baseball players and seeing hundreds of kids blow their UCL out, and we determined that this type of biomechanics were probably leaking energy into joints that can't sustain it. But stuff like that is really hard to measure. It's really hard to quantify. A lot of times you just have to use your eye. And it's really hard to see because a lot of these sports actions happen so fast because kinetic energy transfer is super fast. That if your eye isn't trained to pick these up, or you don't have the tools like slow motion camera, you may never fully see it. So stuff like that is hard to measure.
Yeah, and hopefully though more tools will come out, or more affordable tools will come out as we go.
Yeah, there is one. I did see this one guy's Instagram that I thought was really cool, where he was doing some sort of like study like at a lab or something like that. He's a runner, he's a long distance runner, and there's like a filter that he goes on the treadmill, and like there's like, I guess it's AI or something, where like anyone who walks through like the camera lens, when they look at the monitor, it can create your skeleton with all the different like vector points on the joints, pelvis, shoulders. He's running on a treadmill. Like, have you ever seen Total Recall?
I think so. A long
Yeah,
time ago.
It basically creates like an X-ray over your body. Now that looked really freaking cool, and that kind of technology we've been trying to perfect since the 1950s. The Soviet Union, they used to, the Soviet Union developed the first motion capture technology.
No.
Yeah, so if you remember in the documentary where they had that gymnast, they put all those little like lights on him.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't, and it had to be, they needed to hook a wire to him because wireless power wasn't like a thing. Like they didn't have battery technology. It wasn't that good yet. So they put all these different light bulbs on him, and they ran this type of like aperture camera where they had to like run slides and it would catch the light so they can track him, and they had him doing gymnastics moves. It looked really primitive, but they were able to track his biomechanics in motion to figure out joint angles and vectors and things like that. And eventually that idea turned into motion capture once it became digital.
That's nuts.
Yeah, so we've been trying to do this for a long time, and it progresses. It's going to get really close. Like, I have a feeling when the technology spike can hit perfectly with the cost, when that intersection takes place, we're going to have the tools, like me and you can just buy them on Amazon, and we can start collecting data and get better units of measurement to prove the neurological training is effective, more quantifiable.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I really think when 3D cameras become commonplace, when we all just have one in our phone, or when we have a headset, when everyone has a 3D camera, I think that the apps will get to the point where you can do all this stuff recording it with a 3D camera.
Yeah, man. It's going to be cool.
So we're not far away. I mean, the Apple Vision has it, but it's not,
too bad
it's
Apple
not cheap
Vision.
enough
Too bad
for
no
like
one
all
likes
the smart
Apple
people to
Vision.
get. Yeah, it's not ubiquitous enough where all the smart people are actually building on it, All right, one last question, and this is more of a clarification thing. You've answered it in the context of other questions on this episode and in other episodes, but the stretch shortening cycle, I just wanted to ask you about that specifically. Could you explain what it is exactly and how its role in plyometrics and nervous system training? And then we can wrap up with that for today.
Okay. So the stretch shortening cycle is probably the most underutilized mechanism when it comes to like the current industry of sports performance training and even fitness. So what the stretch shortening cycle is, it's just a built-in mechanism to help you absorb a dangerous amount of force so it doesn't break you and recoil it back in the direction it came from. Right? And it's just a natural reaction of difference, like of physics, like a basketball has a stretch phase or aeration phase or whatever it's called. as a, like where it expands. Like if you drop a basketball in slow motion when it hits the ground, it expands. And then because of the type of material, it takes that kinetic energy, can recoil it back into itself, and that bounces it back up. But we have the same thing built into our own bodies. Like all objects can absorb kinetic energy, but not all objects can recoil kinetic energy efficiently. Like dropping a bowling ball or dropping a basketball, it can recoil, basketball recoil much better. So our bodies have a built-in safety mechanism. We detect a certain amount of force that's decently high at a certain speed. That stretch shortening cycle, it's like an airbag slash slinky slash spring. So when it hits, all your muscles like contract, like all your muscles flex, right? Like an airbag to absorb it. It holds the skeleton in place. It holds the joint integrity in place. But then also imagine an airbag that also has a PSI where it can shoot the air, like it can shoot the air out and shoot the air back in. So it takes that, but instead of air, it's kinetic energy. So it can trap the kinetic energy and shoot it back in, and it happens really fast. It happens within like half a second. It's hard to see with the naked eye. It gets blurry. But that is the number one mechanism in all sports velocity movements. In every soccer, baseball, everything, the stretch shortening cycle is at work. And you'll see a lot of people who don't exactly know what they're looking at, or they haven't been trained to fully understand how this mechanism works. So they do a lot of things that don't exactly enhance it. Not very well. Like you'll see a lot of like posing, like you see athletes, they'll do a big jump and they'll land like this and be still. Because they think that stillness equals strength. But it's like, guys, you just wasted the freaking rep. You just wasted it. You just wasted the recoil. But that's not how they're trained. They're not trained to look at it that way. So that activation in your body, making that really enhance, that is the key to everything in velocity movements. And you can hyper accelerate that, training it at speed strength on the force velocity curve. Like 60% speed, 40% strength type ratio, like a medicine ball throw or a plyometric push-up, or like a single leg jump, or just a regular jump. And so what you're doing with plyometrics or with the super cat or box jumps, all you're doing is you're enhancing that stretch shortening cycle. You're improving it, making yourself nice and elastic and springy so you can recoil and absorb kinetic energy much more efficiently.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting aspect that I don't hear anyone talk about. So it comes up a lot, so I wanted to dive into that. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's listening. Like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Leave your questions. We'll get to them, or DM Nervous System Training Podcast on Instagram, or Nervous System Training Podcast at gmail.com. Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, thank you.